Hi everyone. Last time we learned in chapter 5 verses 17 through 20 that Jesus is not setting aside the law of Moses. His Jewish disciples continue to follow it, and then all his disciples, both Jewish and Gentile, follow his teaching. So Jesus doesn't set aside the law, rather with the coming of the kingdom he fulfills it. He raises the standard of God's will for his followers. And then we have 6 examples of this greater righteousness of the kingdom that Jesus teaches that help us understand what he means by fulfilling the law. And our first example is on murder and angry words. Matthew 5:21 through 26. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. So Jesus' audience has heard this teaching on murder in the synagogues. The phrase, you shall not murder, is from Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. It is, of course, the 6th of the 10 commandments. The phrase, whoever murders will be liable to judgment, is a summary of several passages from Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And as these scriptures indicate, judgment here means put to death. So Jesus is dealing with what Moses taught in the Old Testament. Verse 22, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother or sister will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. In the phrase, but I say to you, Jesus is speaking authoritatively. Moses said this, but I say this. And no regular Jewish teacher would talk this way. And he does this with all 6 examples. And what he says perfects what Moses began in giving the law. This shows Jesus' great authority. He is more authoritative than even Moses, the great lawgiver. Here Jesus expands what God's will is. Not just those who murder are liable to judgment. Also those who are angry will be liable to judgment. Now this might seem a bit extreme, but next he gives 2 examples that help us to see that he's focused on angry, destructive words. The first example, whoever insults, is literally says to his brother or sister, Raka. Raka is from Aramaic and is simply transliterated into the Greek text. It means stupid or empty head. This person will be liable to the council or the Sanhedrin, similar to the Supreme Court in our country. Now, this is hyperbole, an intentional exaggeration to make a point, and Jesus does this a lot, as we'll see in just a moment, talking about cutting off body parts. And in this case, this, kind of an insult would not be taken up in the context of the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court. The point, rather, is that it's that serious. It's a capital crime. And then there's the second example, whoever says, you fool. This is a Greek word that transliterated is moron. It means fool or idiot. It's really not that different than raka. This person will be liable to Gehenna or hell, the place where the wicked will go to be punished at the end of time. This second example doesn't seem to be, a worse incident than the first, and the punishment in the first most likely assumes that the person would also go to Gehenna. Jesus is saying that anger is at the root of murder, and even small, wrongful or unloving expressions of anger, like an insult, are an expression of murder. If murder destroys someone, angry words are verbal murder, tearing down and destroying someone with our words. And of course, if simple insults are so serious, how much more, other more serious expressions of destructive anger that are still short of murder. Now, just a note here, there is a textual variant, angry with his brother or sister without cause. And this is not in the earliest Greek manuscripts, and I think it also takes the passage in a bit of a different direction than what's intended. After all, everyone who's angry thinks that they have cause, so I'm not sure this phrase helps us very much. And also, do we ever have cause to tear down or seek to destroy someone verbally? Correction in love, yes, but not verbal murder. Questions. What about Jesus' anger, for instance, in Mark 3, verse 5, where Jesus is angry with people in the synagogue because they can't accept his ministry of healing on the Sabbath and giving mercy to people? In Scripture, it isn't wrong to get angry. Ephesians 4:26 says, "Be angry and do not sin." It's what you do with your anger that's key. Does it move you to correct an injustice, for instance, in the right way? Or does it lead you to sin, taking vengeance through destructive words and actions? A second question, what about when Jesus used the word fool in Matthew 23:17? He says to the Pharisees, "You blind fools." Well, here Jesus is admonishing the Pharisees for their own well-being, correcting their sin out of love for them. And this is quite different than simply tearing someone down with insults. They were being fools, and so he says this. Verse 23, "So if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister and then come and offer your gift." This is an encouragement to make things right. If you have offended someone because of your angry words, seek reconciliation. And of course, this teaching can be applied more broadly to any way that we have sinned against someone, but angry words are the example here. This passage envisions temple worship in Jerusalem. Again, this is a very Jewish gospel. And this was not a regular occurrence, but for many it would involve a long trip, perhaps several days. So Jesus' words are radical. To leave your gift in the temple and go make things right might be impossible to do in a literal sense. This is probably hyperbole, but it makes its point. This is a very serious issue and must be dealt with, even if it means setting aside worship of God for a time. That's how important it is. And of course, a part of this is to recognize that our relationship with God is affected by our relationships with others. We cannot have a right relationship with God when we are not in right relationship with others, when it's on us that things aren't right. That is, if we've sinned against them and not dealt with it. This keeps us from being able to offer up right worship, and that's why it has to be dealt with before we come to offer our gift. Verse 25, "Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny." Jesus here warns us to make things right. If he encouraged us before, this is a warning. As he's already said, if we are guilty of speaking angry, insulting words against others, we are liable to judgment, and so we must act quickly to avoid judgment. Jesus regularly speaks of sin as a debt that is owed, and uses the image of a debtor's prison where, you're imprisoned until you pay off your debt, or, until you finally cough up those hidden treasures you have, or if you don't have any, perhaps your family has pity on you to get you out. This is much a parable as anything, talking about God's judgment of us on the final day, as is the case in Matthew 18:35 and the parable of the unforgiving servant. The accuser may be the one you have offended. In any case, if you don't act quickly to make things right, you will be judged. Jesus is saying the final day is coming, so act. The debtor's prison here is most likely another reference or image for hell. Verse 26 is making the point that you will never get out. The penny here refers to the smallest Roman coin. Next up, our second example is Matthew 5:27 through 30, our second example of the greater righteousness of Jesus on adultery and the lustful look. Verse 27, "You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." This is a quote of the 7th commandment from Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. Jesus has just dealt with the 6th, and now he moves to the 7th of the 10 commandments. Although no penalty is mentioned here by Jesus, according to the law, the judgment for adultery is death. Verse 28, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Now notice it's not just the look, it is the lustful look, the desire to engage sexually. Now this much is clear, but this may also involve more than just a sexual angle. The 10th commandment in Exodus 20:17 speaks of coveting a neighbor's wife, and in the Greek version of the Old Testament, coveting is the same word as lust that's used here in our verses. So the lust could be for social or economic reasons, as well as you look for maybe a spouse with better connections or better business interests. A kind of spouse upgrade for a number of possible different reasons. Jesus classifies the lustful look as adultery. As with the angry words example, we are dealing with smaller, less obvious example of a greater, more obvious sin. And notice that in both there are actions involved, not just heart intentions. He isn't making a simple contrast between actions and intentions. Before, it was anger expressed through simple insults. And here it is wrongful lust that is expressed through a look of the eyes. Now, this doesn't mean that the wrongful lust in itself isn't wrong. Jesus says in Matthew 15:19, "Out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder and adultery," the two examples we're working with, and those desires are indeed evil. But since Jesus taught that what is in the heart comes out in our words, Matthew 12, and our deeds, Matthew 7, he focuses on the fruit of the desire as evidence of the desire. Here, very small evidences, a simple insult, a longing glance. Question: does this apply in reverse to women? It's clearly written to men. I think a good example and good rule of thumb is that, whatever is said just to men, if applicable, should also govern women disciples of Jesus, in this case, in their interactions with men. And then we have a warning, verse 29. "If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell." Both of these statements make the same point. This is a very serious issue that must be dealt with at all costs. Now, in our culture, this whole idea of the lustful look doesn't matter at all. It's really, truly no big deal. Just as, simple insults would not be considered a big deal in our culture. But to God, both of these things are deadly serious. The phrase "causes you to sin" is literally to cause you to stumble. The idea is that you fall down or stray off the path of God's righteousness. It means that you fall into sin, which leads to hell. Jesus is using hyperbole here. This isn't a call to literal amputation. This wouldn't fix anything since, sin comes from the heart and you would still have another eye. Jesus is teaching us here to deal with what leads you to sin, not just don't sin, but get rid of things that lead you to sin. For instance, for an alcoholic, don't just stop getting drunk, but stop going to bars and hanging out with friends that will tempt you to get drunk. And we are to do this even if it means cutting off something as important as your right eye or hand. The right hand was more highly valued in ancient cultures, and it's not so clear if this was true with the right eye as well. The logic here is that, your right eye and hand are very valuable, but to avoid hell is even more valuable. This is how serious this topic is. Finally, let's look at how Jesus fulfills the law. These first two examples that Jesus gives of the exceeding righteousness of the kingdom show us one way that he does this. Not only is the obvious larger sin wrong, murder or adultery, the less obvious, smaller version of the same sin, angry words or the lustful look, is also wrong. The standard is raised. Even though Moses didn't mention these, God's standard now includes the smaller examples, angry words and the lustful look. And this doesn't contradict or annul the law because literal murder and adultery are still wrong. But it expands or fulfills or perfects the law.